Today is all about ServiceNow and the health of your platform. And to give you a little background about this topic and why it was chosen is, we're one of the top ServiceNow partners in the ecosystem, but we're also a very large user of ServiceNow. So CDW is a huge ServiceNow customer, and we wrestle with kind of the same things. The platform has been here at CDW since 2013. 9 years. So talk about going through upgrades and configurations and, it's not a four-letter word, but it might as well be one, customizations. You've seen it all, right? And at the end of the day, how do we make sure our platform's healthy so as we continue to invest in the platform, we're building on a really strong foundation. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. And, let's get rolling. First thing up is, Eros Bravo. You can see his video there. I'm going to formally kind of pass the ball to him in just a couple of minutes. Eros and I have worked together for over 10 years. I've known him for close to 20 years in the ecosystem, and Eros leads a number of things here at CDW with a focus, of course, on research and development, innovation, and his team is a team that has put together some programs for us to help us keep our customers' platforms healthy. So we'll talk, I'll pass the baton to Eros in just a moment, but let's get to it. ServiceNow platform health. There's lots of reasons this is critical and this is vital. And there's a number of different ways that you can make sure that you're improving the health of your platform, but also building a process where you've got some continuous kind of health protocols and processes in place. So we're going to help you through that journey today, give you some ideas, and also hopefully enable you to kind of take some next steps. So let's talk about factors of impacting ServiceNow health. I mean, why do we have to worry about this? Why do we have to have health checks or scans or programs like this? Well, for starters, if the platform has been there for a long time, and how do you define a long time? Well, if it's been implemented, in the past year or two, chances are it's relatively aligned closely to out of the box. And also, as long as it was properly implemented, because there's so many different ways you can configure a workflow in ServiceNow. If it's done on best practices, if your integrations are done with best practices, and your system's a year or two old, chances are there's not a lot lurking back there, but you never know. Systems can be highly or overly customized, right? There can be integrations that are not just significant number, but maybe very complex. So as other technologies are getting upgraded, there could be impacts. And then, how many hands have been, right, in the cookie jar? How many cooks are in the kitchen? I can come up with a million analogies on it. How many developers have you had touch your system in the last 3, 6, 12, or 18 months? And included with that are partners, right? So ServiceNow is very pervasive in the organization. Lots of parts of the business are getting hands in it. And, we've got development tools where folks can build, right? And that's great. But are we following the same protocols? So that can be it. And of course, if you're having noticeable performance issues, those are also things that we'll want to take a look at. So these are just a handful of them. There's a lot more behind it, but at the end of the day, platform health is going to help us reduce costs, drive more ROI, and more importantly, whatever you're going to invest in ServiceNow in 2023, let's make sure the footing is strong. So as far as the high-level assessment process, well, it usually starts with some type of health scan. There's different technologies for that. I'll let Eros talk about it. But really, first and foremost, we want to identify technical debt. That's all that stuff that's very tactical about the programming and the scripting and what was done to the system. We want to develop a remediation plan. Could be a punch list or a backlog of changes you need to make to the system to get it more in line with good practice, reduce technical debt. But we're also looking for opportunities to gain efficiencies. Just because something's not broken, it works, it functions, it'll survive an upgrade, doesn't mean it's not time to look at doing it differently in ServiceNow, because ServiceNow's tools, technologies, features have evolved, and there might be a simpler, lighter touch way of doing what you had to configure for 2 or 3 years ago. So efficiency gains, we want to do that. And you need a plan to implement those changes and update it. So, at the end of the day, it's pretty straightforward, but once it's done, right, reassessing it periodically, making sure the teams that are touching your ServiceNow platform are also aligned with this kind of new way of working forward, so that as you do health assessments and checks, each year, each 18 months, you're going to find fewer and fewer things like we overscripted, we over-customized. You'll still catch a lot of things that could have been done more efficiently, and you'll find opportunities for improving the health, but you'll ultimately have a cleaner system long term. And on that note, I'm going to turn the mic over to Eros, who's going to talk to us about health scans, that process, what it looks like. He's going to also share 2 or 3 real-world examples of where we've helped customers not only do the health scan, but remediate, and we'll show you the results they got on that. So Eros, mic is yours.
Thank you, John. And hello, everyone. So I thought we'd start by talking a little bit about what an actual health scan is. And health scans aren't unique to ServiceNow. This is something that you can do on a lot of different platforms out there in the marketplace. There are health scans for things like Salesforce, for example. And within the ServiceNow ecosystem, there are a number of competing products to allow you to do health scans. ServiceNow itself has kind of 2 versions of this. Some of you might have access to the free version of that within your ServiceNow instance. Some of you might have access to the paid version of the ServiceNow Health Scan as some kind of a program that you've joined with ServiceNow. Here at CDW, we use a health scan tool called Quality Clouds, and we think it's a really great tool. But if you look at how these work, they really all work in a similar fashion. Essentially what you're doing is you have a set of rules about what good practice is. And usually those rules apply to configuration of your ServiceNow system, and they might also apply to coding. It's kind of how you're writing scripts and how you're coding within the system itself. There might be some additional rules that are specific to things like security. So for example, in our quality scout scans, we have not just JavaScript and ServiceNow configuration rules, but also GDPR rules. So depending on which health scanner you're using, these rules can be different. Sometimes you can contribute to the rule base. Sometimes you're just getting kind of a preset number of rules. But once you have those rules in place, then it kind of works the same way moving forward from there, which is what's going to happen is the system's going to scan all of the tables in ServiceNow that hold your configuration, all of the tables in ServiceNow that hold actual code and scripts. It's going to compare that configuration versus known good configurations. It's going to compare that script to make sure that you're following best practices in your rule set, and so on and so forth. So once that comparison is made, we can point out, hey, here are some places where you've configured the system in a way which would not be considered a best practice and could cause issues. Or here are some places where you've written a script that maybe didn't follow coding best practices that you potentially could have done better. And maybe here are the issues that could cause. So an example of that, and this is a very basic example, to anyone who's ever coded probably knows this one, right? Which is that you should not hard code variables. And I think anyone that's taking coding 101 or any kind of a coding class, that's something that they'll tell you is bad practice right from the get-go, is don't hard code your variables, because if that hard code is wrong, or you move something or delete a document, something's going to go wrong. So this is something that almost every health scan is going to check for. It'll go through all of the code in your system and say, have I hard coded any variables? And if the answer to that is yes, we're going to flag where that's occurred, how many times it's occurred, etc. And that's really the premise here of the health scan, is we are going to check configuration and coding practices against best practices and tell you where you potentially have an issue. The other thing that almost every good health scan does is some kind of a peer benchmark. And this is really important because good is relative. So if I did a scan of your system and I told you to, your security configurations, you are 90% following best practices and 2% don't follow best practices, you'd say, wow, I'm doing really good. But if 90% of your peers were at 99%, suddenly you don't feel so great about that score. And that's going to be true across the board. So not only do we find how in compliance are you with best practices, but then we also compare that to how in compliance everybody else is. So we can give you a meaningful metric, because if we just said, hey, you have a B, or you have an A, or you have a C, and it's against kind of an unknown metric that doesn't really tell you the whole story. So I'm really big on these peer benchmarks. It is something that we get out of Quality Clouds. It is something that ServiceNow gives you in their health scan. And it really lets you know kind of what areas you should concentrate on when you're getting the results of these health scans.
And Eros, I also like the fact that when I've seen these with clients, right, just because we're flagging stuff, just because part of the output is showing, areas of concern or possible issues, once we get down, we analyze those and may decide, hey, 7 of those things, we're just going to leave them. Yeah, they're not best practice, but there's no negative impact, and the cost to fix them or replace them shows us no ROI or benefit. So again, that was something I noticed in pretty much all of the client engagements we've done. It's not just about identifying what could have been done better, but really focusing on the things that are having a negative impact, or conversely, we can reverse to really see some positive outcomes.
Great point, John. I'm actually going to tell a little story about that a little further down in the presentation. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is what you can expect from the results. And we can get really detailed about, scanning every single line of configuration, every single line of code in your system. But those scans, no matter how detailed they are and no matter how many best practices we have, they don't give you context. So what you can expect from the results that you're getting from these health scans is knowing where to look. So if you're having performance issues, they'll tell you a bunch of places that could be causing those performance issues. If you're worried about security, it'll tell you what configurations potentially could be security concerns, right? Um, it makes quality measurable. So it's really hard to know if you're improving, if the quality of your instance is improving or decreasing over time, if you don't have a tool to let you measure that quality. So that's one thing that, is fantastic with these health scans, is it makes quality into a measurable metric. So you can see, am I getting better or am I getting worse? Finding weaknesses. So again, from a security perspective, are there things that I should be concerned about? Where do those weaknesses live? As John was mentioning, prioritizing work. So we might find, a lot of different results that we look at and say, here are some areas where we're not meeting best practices, but it can be overwhelming sometimes. We might come back with a list of, hey, here's 300 things that you want to go look at. But we can prioritize those and say, hey, of those 300 things, here's 30 that really could be impacting performance or really might cause you to struggle with upgrading. So it lets you kind of prioritize the work that you find to make improvements, so that you're improving on the things that have the most impact as you go through. And finally, estimating what your remediation looks like. So it's great to have a list to say, hey, here's 300 things that you can improve on. But if you have no idea how long it's actually going to take to improve on those things, it limits kind of the value of that information. So what we're able to do is to tell you, here's all the things that we think that you can improve on. By the way, we think that that's, you know, 1,000 hours of work or 5,000 hours of work, whatever that number might be. So these are all things that you can kind of expect to get from the results. What you can't expect is context. So sometimes there's a reason that you hard coded that variable. There's a reason that you left that anonymous access open from a security standpoint. There's a reason that you modified that incident table instead of creating a scoped application. And none of these health scan applications are going to know what those reasons are. So it's really important that you not only have the data that's being provided to you via the health scan, but that you have the expertise to analyze that data and that you spend the time to put that data in context so that you know whether a red flag is really a red flag or if a red flag is just a decision that you made going in with full knowledge of what the repercussions potentially were to that decision. So as John mentioned, we have some real world use cases, and we're going to do one around kind of performance. We're going to do another one around upgrading and managing your instance. And finally, we'll do one around quality of service. each one of these use cases came from a scenario where we were asked by a customer to do a health scan for them and kind of run through the results with them to help improve the quality of their instance. Now, we're not going to tell you the customer names. We're going to keep those hidden to protect the innocence, but we are going to go through and show you some real results and real data and talk to you about kind of how it went. So first, let's talk a little bit about measuring performance. If you look at almost every health scan out there, they tend to kind of bucket the results. So here we're looking at manageability, performance, scalability, security, and upgradability. And I'm actually going to jump to my next slide and I'll jump back. So what that might look like here, manageability, typically that means how hard or easy is it to maintain my instance in good working order. Performance, how responsive and how fast does my instance feel when I'm using it? Security, how secure is my system? Upgradability, when I go to do an upgrade, how much work is it going to take to put that upgrade in place? And finally, scalability. Will the performance on my instance stay the same way when I move from 100 users to 1,000 users? And this is actually a slide that we use when we do a readout of our health scan. So we show you kind of what the results were within your instance, and then we also show you the target of where we think that you should be in that particular metric. So here, for example, we're saying that for this customer, they had a performance manageability score of 87, but we wanted them to be, 90 to 95. They had a performance score of 75, and we wanted them to be around 85 to 90. And where does that target come from? So that target comes essentially from a peer benchmark. So if we look at all of other people that are doing health scans on ServiceNow, the field tends to average in that range versus where this particular scan ended up in that particular area. So depending on what tool you're using, you're going to see different buckets here, or maybe different names to different buckets. Sometimes you'll get a score like the score you're seeing here. Sometimes you get a grade. Maybe you get 1 star to 5 star. But essentially, you're getting the same type of data where we're doing a measurement against some kind of a benchmark. In this case, it is a peer benchmark. And again, your category names might be different, but they tend to represent these same types of buckets. Okay, back to performance for a second. So in this particular scenario, we ran a scan, and what we saw was that the performance number was really low. And 74%, technically that's still in the green, but it's almost 90 points. I'm sorry, it's almost 20 points away from the average. So it's significantly lower than we would like it to be. So you might see a score like this and think, geez, my performance is probably pretty bad. I bet that my users are complaining about how slow the system is, or how long it takes to load pages, or maybe how long it takes to run scripts or fire off notifications, etc. And that's what we thought when we first saw this number. But this is another scenario where context is really important. So what we did here is we took this number and then we started looking at what the number would ties to. So every time you see a metric like this, typically there's a list of actual instances where configuration or coding might be affecting performance, and things that you could do to improve that performance by fixing those actual instances. So we get a number like this that says, hey, you're at 75%. Then behind that number, there's probably a list of probably 100 plus things that we can improve in. And sometimes it's the same thing multiple times. So it might be, hey, you're running something globally that you might be able to run within a smaller scope, or it might be that you're looping something. There's a number of things that could cause performance, and we'll show you every instance where that's happening, which means I could go back and I could fix each one of those instances. And as I fix those instances of the bad coding or bad configuration, this score should tick up and further. But as John was saying earlier, right, when we see something like this, we don't want to fix things just for the sake of fixing them. We want to fix them because they have a tangible benefit to you. And I think that's really how you should look at performance in particular, but health scans in general. Is I'm not going to do something just because it's the best practice. I'm going to do something because I'm getting a tangible benefit out of it. In this particular case, we started going through and we started noticing a pattern of what we're seeing. What we started seeing is that we were running a lot of jobs that were running globally. And we started talking to the customer and saying, hey, looks like your performance is really bad. Have you been getting complaints? Is anyone complaining about, the performance of the portal or how long it takes to open up an incident? And what we started hearing back from them was, no, not really. And it was kind of interesting because we were expecting one answer and we got an absolutely different answer. And the customer said, yeah, we're not really concerned with performance. We think we're doing pretty well. And it just didn't tie out with what we were seeing in the data. So when we investigated further, what we found is that the performance of that customer's instance was absolutely terrible every single day for about 3 hours, starting at midnight Eastern, when nobody was in the system. What happened is they had scheduled a bunch of global scripts to all run at the exact same time. So they had 30 or 40 scripts that all ran at midnight, and nobody cared because nobody was in the system at midnight. So could we get some better performance by, scheduling those scripts at different times, or maybe making some of them run less, or maybe making some of them run in scope rather than globally? Absolutely, we could. Was that customer going to really get any value out of that? No, not at all. So it's really important that when we get data like this, we're spending the time to do the analysis, to give that data context and see what it really means. So here's a second use case, and this one was kind of interesting. So we had a customer that came to us and they said, hey, every time we got to do an upgrade, we've got a skip list that's just pages and pages, and it just takes hours and hours and hours and days and weeks to do this upgrade and test everything. And we don't know why this process is so difficult. I go to Snugs and I talk to some of my peers, and one of them is like, yeah, just push the button and the upgrade happens, and we don't even go down. It's great. So they talked to us, they had us go ahead and to run a health scan. And we concentrated on, the area of manageability and upgradability. And you can see here kind of what that looks like. So here we're looking at penalties by impact area. So where we think that we could be causing problems in the system. And upgradability, it was 21% of their penalty area. It wasn't the biggest slice of the pie, but it was a really big slice of the pie. So we said, yeah, I could see TE definitely are having some upgradability issues. So we started looking at this, and most of their upgradability issues were due to configuration not following best practice. So they basically had some really old areas of the system that had never been upgraded. Well, this was an ITSM customer, and they were up to date with their upgrades, as painful as they were. And we started analyzing this data to try and figure out what was going on. And as we looked through it, and it said, you've got configuration issues on your incident tables and your change tables and your task tables and so on and so forth. And we went through and we started using the system. So we went in from the standpoint of a user and put an incident through the system, put a problem through the system, put a change through the system. And we're looking at this, and it looks like everything follows best practices, and they're talking to us about what's going on. I don't understand why I'm struggling so much with these upgrades. And at first we were kind of stumped. It seemed like everything was okay, but the data that we were getting back was reporting that everything wasn't okay. And it was telling us what the customer was telling us, that they were struggling with upgradability. And again, we had to kind of investigate. So we put our investigative hats on and we started looking at the customer's production systems, and we started looking at the development systems. And what we found was that at some point in the distant past, somebody had decided to make a clone of the task table. And what that means is they had basically created a copy of every single incident table, every change table, every problem table within the entire system, and hidden those tables that they created so that they weren't visible except for by a very specific security rule. So what that meant was if you were in production, you only saw one version of the incident and you only ever made changes to one version of the incident, but you had this kind of shadow incident table and a shadow change table and a shadow problem table. And those shadow tables were never getting upgraded. and they looked almost exactly like the regular tables. They were, one kind of letter off when you were looking at table structure, and frankly, nobody had really noticed them, and we didn't really notice them in the first pass. So what we were able to do, since those weren't being used, is we unraveled all of that work and we got rid of all of those tables. And the next time that that customer went to go do an upgrade, they didn't have the same struggles that they were having with previously. So again, it's really a lot about context, right? But one of the things that we do when we look at things like upgradability is we don't just look at your score, we start making recommendations in broad strokes. And I think this is a really good way to do it if you're a customer. One is to look for kind of quick wins. There are probably things that you could do that are not very difficult to do, it's going to increase your score significantly. So here, for example, we said, hey, take a look at all the custom scripts you have. It looks like a lot of custom scripts aren't even being used, but they're getting flagged when you do an upgrade. So if you get rid of all these scripts that aren't being used, you're probably going to see an 8% increase in ease of upgrading your system. Another thing that we like to do, and you'll see that here on the top, is we kind of look at, is this a technical change that you need to make, or is this a process-driven change? So a great example of that is whether or not you include meta tags in your service catalog items. So this isn't bad coding, it isn't bad configuration, it's bad process. If you put those tags in, that's going to make it faster and easier to find your service catalog items. If you don't put those tags in, the system really has to do a lot of work to find those catalog items. So not every single change that we would recommend or everything that we would recommend you doing is a technical change. And finally, here's another one. So this is a customer that actually did a health scan with us and then came back a couple of years later and did another health scan with us. And really, we see this a lot with customers where you look at quality as something that's continual versus continuous. And what I mean by that is that what a lot of customers do is they say, I'm going to check in on my quality, right? I'm going to run this health scan every year. And inevitably, what happens is you run the health scan and you start doing some remediation work, and maybe your performance increases because that was really your target at the end of your health scan. Well, when we do the next health scan, the issue isn't performance, it's upgradability. Or the issue isn't upgradability, it's security. And the reason for that is that we're doing this continually versus continuously. So we are looking at a health scan as a checkpoint when we say, how are we doing today? Like a checkup with the doctor. Ideally, what we want to do is to do this continuously. So we're looking at quality as a service where we're continuously measuring how that quality is going up. And we're looking at not just the quality of the instance, but the quality of the people that are putting code into the instance. So with quality clouds, for example, one of the things that we can actually do is we can check the code before we actually commit it. So we might make a bunch of configuration changes. We create an update set for ServiceNow. That's how we kind of publish code inside of ServiceNow. We create that update set before we can actually move that update set into the actual instance to make it live. The system checks the update set against that same set of best practices and will tell you, hey, in this update sets, looks like you skipped some best practices. Before you commit this, you might want to go back and take a look at these things. So what that does is rather than us fixing things, it allows us to prevent things from going in poorly in the first place. And you can even put workflow around that. Say, hey, if I want to commit this update set, but it doesn't, it contains things that could be best practice issues, I need to get an approval from my manager. So now we have kind of, there might be reasons to put things in, but now we're documenting what those reasons are and we're getting approval before we move forward. The other thing that we do when we look at quality as a service, and we try and do this continuously, is we look at, are there certain people that are making the same mistake over and over again? And this is great when you have, as John said, a lot of chefs in the kitchen, right? So if you have a lot of people doing development, sometimes you'll go, geez, I've got, issues in the system. How are they happening? And what we're able to do is to actually set a quality threshold to say, if I'm a developer and I'm doing work in this ServiceNow instance, if the quality of my work drops below a certain threshold, then I need to go through a coaching loop. It allows us to look at somebody and say, you know what, this person is just really struggling with script includes. Let's go ahead and set up a class where we can teach them script includes, and when they go back in, hopefully that cleans up the issues that we're having with them continuously having struggles around script includes. So this is now moving this from being something that's reactive, I'm struggling with my instance, let's do a measurement and then see how we can improve, to something that's proactive. I'm no longer going to allow bad code and bad configuration and bad security to be part of my instance. And I'm going to prevent it before it happens. And I'm going to help my developers by figuring out where they're struggling and training them so that they can get better and no longer have those struggles. So, it's really important that you have a tool that allows you to do this so that you can identify where and why quality issues are occurring. So again, if we're able to focus in and find, hey, this particular person has this particular problem and they're creating 50% of the issues that I'm having with script includes that are affecting my performance, right? Then I'm not just correcting, I'm focusing in and figuring out the where and the why. Those coaching loops that you have in ServiceNow are a great way of then taking that where and why information and creating a loop where we get people better and create positivity. And then finally, it allows us to equally measure all of our developers against the same quality standards, whether those developers are internal employees that work for us as organizations, or whether they're partners, or whether they're staff aug, whatever that scenario might be, we can kind of measure everybody against the same metric. This is something that's great for us as partners, because if we do a project in your system, one, we want to know what it looks like before we got there, because there might be problems that we need to account for when we're determining how much time we need to go do a configuration or get to an outcome for you. But the other thing is we want you to be able to measure our work and say, CDW did a great job for us, they're doing quality work. And the way that we could do that is through these quality as a service type offerings, where you're going in and seeing how we're doing the whole time, making sure that we're adhering to your quality standards and to leave your instance better than it was when we got there.
Eros, yeah, thanks a bunch for that. I have a question for just at a high level for the group. You talk about it starting with a scan, right? Can you talk a little bit about the different methods and ways of getting a scan? On the screen here is the CDW approach. So we've got a service that where we can come in, we use technology that we subscribe to called Quality Clouds, and we'll do all the scanning. We'll come back with all the reports and metrics. We'll then put that together in an action plan, which includes all of the stuff you talked about, right? But that's one way to do it. And if anybody on the call or any CDW customers is interested in getting some help from us, we're happy to have a meeting and talk to you about that. But Eros, maybe you could talk about other options out there, in what you're seeing.
Absolutely. So CDW has a health check scan, depending on where your licensing level is and what version of ServiceNow you're on. That could be free for you, that you could run within your instance itself. It's at a high level, so it gives you kind of, if you're looking at the picture here, the equivalent of what we're seeing, where we're seeing quality of cloud impact areas. It gives you kind of the equivalent to that, where it gives you some high level guidance of where you're sitting. It doesn't let you kind of drill down into the really detailed analysis of what that looks like. They have a paid offering that's also part of, I think, their Insight program.
Eros, I'm sorry, you're talking about ServiceNow specifically, right? So natively, they can, yep, perfect.
Yeah, and then they have a paid offering that gives you a significant additional level of detail to that as well. Then if you go to a store, there are a number of health scan tools, at least 4 or 5, of which Quality Clouds is one. All of those tend to be paid offerings as well. I think it's really important, though, that as a customer that's wanting to do a health scan of their own instance to see where quality is, they plan to either put a team together that's going to do the analysis of those results for them internally, or they go out to the partner channel and hire somebody who can do that analysis for them. Because really, if you're just looking at that scan data without a plan of how you're going to do the analysis and how you can do the remediation, you're probably not going to get a lot out of it.
Appreciate that. So just to kind of recap, right? There's options out there for you. We've used pretty much most of those options. We've worked with the ServiceNow technologies directly. We ultimately decided to go with Quality Clouds because it brought some other things to the table. We also use Quality Clouds during some of our projects. So if we're doing implementation work, as Eros said, we'll run the scans. We'll kind of make sure we're building on healthy footing. So yeah, that's that. And the other thing I wanted to share with the team on this call is our next event. So we've got an educational session coming up in just about 2 weeks, and that is based on security operations. Eros, if you could hit the next on that. That'd be great. This is a great topic. We're going to be focusing on helping to mature your security operations within ServiceNow. And you probably have an invite in your inbox, but if you don't, let us know. We'll make sure you get it. And then if you missed our last one, we do these twice a year with the new builds of ServiceNow, Tokyo being the last one that we did it on. We kind of highlight our top 5 features. We even had ServiceNow participate in that. So if you missed that one or have others in your organization that would like to see that one, shoot us an email or a note, and we'll get you a link and a copy of the deck. So again, thanks for all who attended. Hope you found value here. We'll get out a copy of this deck and a link to the recording as well. And if you'd like to pick our brain on anything at all, if you plan to do your own health check and want to just get some advice and tips, we're happy to jump on a call. You're a CDW customer, you're part of the family. We've got strong resources here that are available to you, even if you want to just run ideas by us or get some guidance. Again, thanks so much for attending. Look forward to the next session, and also any topics you'd like to see as we start putting together our early 2023 calendar for the free educational webinars. Don't hesitate to let us know what you think would be valuable. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.